The large meeting hall of the Galactic Council became quiet. 300 different alien species sat in their seats, watching a screen that floated above the center of the room. They were looking at a human ship that had just appeared at the edge of a star system called Kepler. The ship was alone. Ambassador Vexillar from a race called the Coordination made a clicking sound with his mouthparts. His species thought this sound meant something was funny. His crystal-like eyes reflected the image of the lone human vessel. The ship was not very big. It looked about the same size as a normal cargo ship. He spoke to everyone in the hall. A device changed his clicking sounds into words that all species could understand. He said the humans had sent only one ship to fight against the Vardesh Empire's claim to an entire star system. One single ship. Many aliens in the chamber started laughing. The sounds were strange because each species made different noises. Some clicked, some hummed, some made sounds humans had never heard before. They all thought it was foolish that humans sent just one ship. A tall creature named Korthak stood up from his seat. He was from the Vardesh Empire. His body was covered in scales that shone under the lights. His species had taken over 17 star systems in the last 100 years. They were known for being strong fighters. Korthak spoke in a deep, rumbling voice. He said humans had only joined the galactic community 15 years ago. They claimed they could travel faster than light, but they showed up in Vardesh space with this tiny ship. He wondered if humans even understood the rules about who owns what territory in space. Far away, on the bridge of the human ship called Unity 7, Commander Jack Morrison looked at the screens in front of him. He was 42 years old. He had been in the military for 20 years, but this was his first time leading a ship in deep space. He felt the heavy weight of responsibility. Everyone on Earth was counting on him. A woman named Lieutenant Kate Sullivan sat at the communications station. She turned to face Morrison. She told him the Vardesh fleet was calling them. The Vardesh were demanding that Unity 7 leave immediately or they would destroy it. Morrison asked how many enemy ships there were. Kate checked her screens and replied there were 73 warships. She added that their main flagship alone was 10 times heavier than Unity 7. Morrison smiled just a little bit. He told Kate to answer their call. He wanted her to tell the Vardesh that humans were there to enforce treaty rights given to Earth under galactic law. Unity 7 would not leave. Back in the council chamber, everyone watched the exchange on their screens. The human ship stayed where it was while the Vardesh fleet began spreading out into an attack pattern. This was normal behavior for any galactic military force. They used overwhelming numbers and attacked quickly. Ambassador Vexillar spoke again. He said this situation was unfortunate. The humans had seemed promising when they first made contact with the galaxy. They had so much potential, but now they were wasting it because of pride. They would not back down even when they should. An old alien named Elder Sareth from the Kelthani species spoke up. Her people were known for thinking deeply about problems instead of just fighting. She had lived long enough to watch many civilizations rise and fall over thousands of years. She said maybe they should ask themselves why humans sent only one ship. Humans were new to the galactic community, yes, but they were not stupid. Their scientific progress in such a short time had been impressive. There must be a reason for sending just one vessel. Korthak interrupted her. He said science meant nothing when you were fighting against superior numbers. He told everyone to watch as humans learned this lesson the hard way. The Vardesh fleet opened fire. Energy weapons that could turn asteroids into vapor shot through space toward Unity 7. The council members expected to see the human ship blown into tiny pieces within seconds, but something impossible happened instead. The Unity 7 flickered like a light turning on and off. The weapons passed through empty space where the ship had been. The ship appeared again 300 kilometers away, completely undamaged. Someone in the council asked if the humans had just used a quantum jump. This was a way of moving through space by using quantum physics, but it normally took hours to calculate and prepare. No species in the galaxy could do it during a battle. Vexillar said it was impossible. His voice now carried doubt. He repeated that quantum jumping required many hours of preparation. Nobody could do it in combat. On the bridge of Unity 7, Morrison watched his screens with satisfaction. Lieutenant Dan Peters sat at the navigation station. He reported that the quantum displacement system was working perfectly. The evasion pattern had been successful. Morrison said good. Now it was time to show the Vardesh what else humans had brought with them. The Vardash fleet tried again. This time they spread out wider, attempting to fill more space with their weapons fire. If the human ship could move quickly, they would shoot at every possible location it might go. Unity 7 began moving in a new way. It did not use normal rocket engines. It did not make another quantum jump. Instead, the ship accelerated to speeds that should have torn it apart. The ship wove through the incoming fire with precision that seemed impossible. Every shot from the Vardash fleet missed by just meters, sometimes by even less. Elder Sareth whispered while watching the display. She said the humans must have achieved true artificial intelligence. Her voice was filled with understanding of what this meant. The news sent waves of shocked conversation through the council. True artificial intelligence was something scientists thought might be possible, but every species that had tried to create it had failed. The processing power needed was too great. The energy consumption was too high. The ethical problems were too complicated. Inside Unity 7, the ship's computer intelligence called Apollo managed every system at the same time. It calculated where enemy shots would go. It optimized how power flowed through the ship. It predicted what the enemy would do next with perfect accuracy. But the human crew still made all the important decisions. Kate Sullivan told Morrison that the Vardash were preparing to launch missiles. 200 of them were heading toward Unity 7. Morrison nodded. He ordered the crew to activate the point defense systems. He said it was time for the Vardash to understand what they were dealing with. The missiles flew toward Unity 7 at high speed. Each one could destroy a small moon. They got within 10 kilometers before the human ship responded to the threat. Beams of light shot out from Unity 7. The beams were invisible to eyes, but deadly in their precision. Each beam found a missile and destroyed it. 200 missiles exploded harmlessly in the emptiness of space. The entire process took less than 3 seconds. The council chamber became chaotic. Representatives from different species argued with each other. Some shouted. Others demanded explanations. How could a species so new to space travel have such advanced technology? It made no sense. Ambassador Vexelar raised his voice above all the noise. He said this changed nothing. One ship, no matter how advanced, could not stand against an entire fleet forever. Eventually, the human ship would make a mistake or run out of power. But Elder Sareth was studying the tactical display more carefully than the others. She noticed something important that everyone else had missed. The human ship had not fired a single weapon meant to hurt the enemy. It had only defended itself. It had not tried to destroy any Vardash ships. She spoke quietly, but her words carried weight. She said the humans were sending a message. They were trying to tell the galaxy something important. The battle continued for 6 hours. The Vardash fleet threw everything they had at Unity 7. The human ship avoided or destroyed every attack with ease that looked almost insulting. Yet Morrison still refused to shoot back with weapons meant to damage enemy vessels. He would not start killing Vardash crew members. On the bridge, Lieutenant Danny Crawford from the weapons station spoke. He told Morrison that the Vardash were getting frustrated. Their attack patterns were becoming more aggressive but also less coordinated. They were making mistakes. Morrison replied that desperation makes people dangerous. He told Kate to open a communication channel to the Vardash flagship. It was time to talk. Korthak's face appeared on the view screen moments later. His scales showed he was angry. The color had changed to show his emotional state. He demanded that the humans surrender now and promised their death would be quick if they did. Morrison stayed calm. He addressed Korthak by his rank. He said humans had no desire for bloodshed. They were there to claim what legally belonged to Earth under galactic law. Korthak had seen what human defensive capabilities were. Morrison asked him politely to withdraw his forces and let the council decide this matter properly according to law. Korthak was not interested in being polite. He said Morrison was hiding behind technology like someone too afraid to fight. The humans had not fired a single shot at his fleet. This meant they could not attack. Morrison corrected him calmly. He said humans chose not to attack. There was a big difference between cannot and will not. But Korthak should make no mistake about it. Humans came prepared for any outcome, including war if necessary. The conversation was being broadcast live to the council chamber. Elder Sareth leaned forward in her seat, her ancient eyes focused hard on Morrison's face as he spoke. She saw something. The conversation between Morrison and Korthak ended badly. The Vardesh commander refused to back down. His pride had been wounded because he could not harm a single human vessel. He gave the order for one final attack, this time with all ships working together. 73 Vardesh warships moved into position around Unity 7. They formed a sphere with the human ship in the center. They would all fire at the same time, creating a wall of destructive energy that no ship could possibly avoid. Kate Sullivan spoke urgently to Morrison. She said the Vardesh were powering up all weapons at once. If they fired together like this, Apollo calculated that Unity 7 had less than 12% chance of surviving. Morrison took a deep breath. The moment he had hoped to avoid had finally arrived. He told Apollo to send the prepared message to Earth. He gave the authorization code that would activate the rest of the plan. Apollo responded immediately. The message had been sent. Confirmation had been received from Earth. The Unity fleet was standing by and ready. The Council's sensors detected strange activity in quantum space before anyone could react. But it was not just one disturbance. There were hundreds of them appearing all at once. Ships began appearing from quantum space throughout the entire Kepler system. Not 73 ships, not even 700 ships. 7,000 human vessels materialized in perfect formation. They all appeared at the same time. Their quantum drives were synchronized with precision that should have been impossible. The entire Vardesh fleet suddenly found themselves surrounded. They were outnumbered nearly 100 to 1. Nobody in the council chamber made a sound. The silence was complete. Every delegate stared at the display in shock. Vexlar finally spoke, but his voice was barely a whisper. He said it was impossible. The resources required to build such a fleet would be enormous. The coordination needed to move them all together was beyond anything known. No species could build such a fleet in secret. Elder Sareth's expression had become grim and serious. She said they had been asking the wrong question all along. They asked why humanity sent only one ship. They should have asked why humanity only needed to send one ship. Morrison's voice came through every communication channel in the system. It was broadcast to the Vardesh fleet, the council, and every listening post within 100 light years. Everyone could hear what he had to say. He addressed Korthak directly and also spoke to the Galactic Council representatives. He said he was authorized to speak for Earth and all human colonies. When humanity joined the galactic community 15 years ago, they came in peace. They studied galactic laws. They learned the customs of other species. They tried to find their place among the stars. He paused to let his words sink in before continuing. But humans also learned galactic history, he said. They saw how disputes were resolved between species. They learned that the strong take from the weak. They understood that justice belongs to those with the largest fleets. So humanity prepared for this reality. Every ship they could see before them had been built in the past 10 years. Every system, every weapon, every technology had been developed through one advantage humans possessed over every other species in the galaxy. Korthak demanded to know what advantage Morrison meant. His voice had lost its earlier certainty and confidence. Morrison replied that humans learned from everyone else. Every species in the galaxy had evolved alone. They developed technology in isolation. They faced their challenges by themselves. But humanity arrived late to the galactic stage. This meant they could study 40,000 years of advancement across 300 different civilizations. Humans did not have to invent quantum drives from nothing. They just had to understand the 17 different approaches already developed by other species and combine the best parts of each. They did not have to discover artificial intelligence on their own. They just had to solve the problems that stopped other species from succeeding. Back on Unity 7, Lieutenant Dan Peters spoke quietly. He told Morrison that Earth was calling. Admiral Frank Harper wanted to speak with him. Morrison told Dan to put the call through. The Admiral's weathered face appeared on a screen. Harper said Morrison had done well so far, but now came the truly difficult part. Morrison asked what the Admiral meant. Harper replied that Morrison needed to make the galaxy understand something important. This was not about showing force. It was about preventing future wars. Morrison nodded his understanding. He turned his attention back to the main screen where Korthak's image waited. Morrison explained the real truth to Korthak. Humans sent one ship because that was all they needed, not because they were arrogant, but because they wanted to give the Vardesh a choice. If humans had arrived with their full fleet from the beginning, the Vardesh would have seen only a threat. but one ship gave them the opportunity to resolve this peacefully. Korthak pointed out that Morrison spoke of peace while surrounding his fleet with thousands of warships. Morrison corrected him. He said he was offering peace while giving Korthak the chance to retreat with honor intact. The Vardesh fleet was still whole. The crews were all unharmed. Nobody had died yet, but Korthak must understand that this system belonged to Earth by law. Humans would defend that claim if necessary. The council chamber erupted into loud debates. Some species called for sanctions against Earth. Others demanded military action against the humans. But Elder Sareth raised her voice above all the chaos and noise. She commanded silence. Her order carried the weight of centuries of service to the council. The room became quiet. She asked if they could not see what was happening. Humanity was offering them a lesson that the galaxy desperately needed to learn. Ambassador Vexillar demanded to know what lesson she meant. Sareth explained that the lesson was simple but profound. Might does not make right. The humans could destroy the Vardesh fleet right now if they wanted to. They could threaten everyone in the galaxy into submission. Instead, they were asking for dialogue. They wanted legal resolution. They sought peace. Humanity was showing the council the civilization they all claimed to be, but rarely achieved in practice. The council members looked at each other. The truth in Elder Sareth's words was uncomfortable, but impossible to deny. Korthak watched from his flagship. He thought carefully about his options. Finally, he spoke to Morrison. He said the human had made his point clear. The Vardesh Empire would withdraw from this system. They would submit the dispute to the council for proper arbitration according to law. Morrison thanked Korthak for his wisdom. He said he looked forward to a peaceful resolution that would satisfy both parties. As the Vardesh fleet began leaving the system, the 7,000 human ships remained in perfect formation. They were a silent reminder that Earth had the strength to enforce its rights. But they chose instead to follow the path of law and diplomacy. 3 days after the confrontation at Kepler, the Galactic Council held an emergency meeting. This time, humanity had been invited to send representatives. They were not just observers anymore. They would participate fully. Ambassador Claire Rodriguez stood at the central platform. Admiral Frank Harper stood beside her, along with Dr. Nathan Price, who was Earth's leading expert on quantum physics. Claire was 57 years old. She had been a diplomat her entire career preparing for this moment, though she never imagined it would come in such a dramatic way. She began speaking to the delegates. Her voice was steady even though 300 pairs of alien eyes watched her every move. She said she was not there to justify Earth's actions. She wanted to explain humanity's philosophy and invite understanding. Ambassador Vexillar interrupted immediately. He said Claire spoke of philosophy while her fleet threatened the stability of the entire galaxy. 7,000 warships, he emphasized. More advanced than anything anyone had seen before. He demanded to know what humanity's true intentions were. Claire met his crystalline gaze without looking away or showing fear. She said their intention was simple. They wanted to survive. Vexler had asked them to explain themselves, so she would take everyone back 15 years, to the day humans received first contact from the galaxy. She activated her own display, showing images of Earth's first encounter with galactic civilization. The pictures showed the arrival of the survey ship, the wonder on human faces, the hope everyone felt. Claire continued her explanation. She said humans were thrilled at first. Humanity had dreamed of this moment for centuries. They imagined a galaxy of peaceful cooperation. They expected shared knowledge and mutual respect. But then they began studying galactic history, laws and customs. What they learned changed everything. The display changed to show statistics of galactic conflicts. It showed territory disputes, wars of conquest, and species that had been driven to extinction or forced into subjugation by stronger neighbors. Claire explained what humans discovered. In just the past 1,000 years, 47 species had been absorbed or destroyed by more powerful neighbors. Humans learned that territorial disputes were not resolved through fair arbitration. They were settled through military might. They realized that justice in the galaxy belonged to whoever had the strongest fleet. Elder Sareth spoke up in a thoughtful voice. She said Claire was not wrong in her assessment, but surely humans understood that this was simply the... Admiral Harper continued speaking to the assembled delegates. He said humanity chose a different path forward. They built enough strength that nobody would dare attack them. Then they used that strength to pursue peace instead of conquest. At Kepler, Commander Morrison had the power to destroy the entire Vardesh fleet. Instead, he avoided combat. He demonstrated human capabilities. Then he offered a peaceful resolution to the dispute. Claire Rodriguez took control of the floor again. She said this brought them to why humanity was truly there at the Council. Earth wanted to propose a major change to the Galactic Accords. The chamber erupted into chaos. Delegates shouted over each other. Change the Accords? These were the foundational laws that had governed galactic civilization for thousands of years. The idea seemed impossible. Claire waited patiently for the noise to die down. When she could be heard again, she laid out the proposal. Humanity wanted to create a mutual defense treaty. Any species that signed this treaty would agree to defend any other member from unprovoked aggression. Territorial disputes would be resolved through binding arbitration, not military force. Technological advancement would be shared among all members, not kept secret. Korthak scoffed at the idea. He said Claire was proposing weakness. She would have species abandon the strength that kept them safe from enemies. Elder Sareth spoke quietly, but her words drew everyone's attention. She said no, humanity was not proposing weakness. They were proposing collective strength. She asked Claire a direct question. If this treaty had been in place before, what would humanity have done when the Vardesh Empire claimed the Kepler system? Claire replied simply, humans would have filed for arbitration. The Council would have reviewed the legal claims of both parties and made a binding decision that both sides had to follow. If the Vardesh refused to comply with the decision, then yes, humans would have defended their rights. But they would have done so with the backing of every treaty member. Korthak asked what would have happened if the Vardesh had agreed to arbitration from the very start. His tone had shifted from hostile to thoughtful. Claire said simply that none of the recent conflict would have been necessary. The Unity fleet would have remained hidden in quantum space. The two species would have resolved their disagreement through law instead of threats of force. A delegate from a species called the Hraks spoke up. The Hraks were part of the Mercantile Coalition. They valued profit and trade above everything else. He asked if this proposed treaty would include provisions for shared technology, because if humanity was willing to share their advances, that could be quite valuable to everyone. Dr. Nathan Price nodded enthusiastically. Every member who signed the treaty would get access to humanity's research database. In return, humans would gain access to their technology and knowledge. He asked them to imagine what they could achieve together. The Hraks had the most advanced manufacturing capabilities in the galaxy. The Kelthani understood biology better than any other species. The Coordination's grasp of quantum mechanics was unmatched by anyone. Claire concluded by saying that together, all these species could advance faster than any of them could achieve alone. They could solve problems that seemed impossible to individual species. They could create a galaxy where strength came from cooperation instead of competition. Elder Sareth stood up from her seat. This was a gesture that commanded immediate attention according to Council protocols and customs. She said she had witnessed the rise and fall of many civilizations over her long life. She had seen the cycle of conflict repeat endlessly across thousands of years. What humanity proposed was radical. It might even be naive. But was it any more naive than the current system, which had brought the galaxy 40,000 years of endless warfare? She looked around the chamber slowly, meeting the eyes of delegates from hundreds of different worlds. She proposed that the Council vote on whether to formally consider humanity's treaty. Not to adopt it immediately, but simply to begin discussions, to explore whether there might be a better way forward than the path they had always followed. Ambassador Vexillar stood as well. He asked what would happen with humanity's fleet. They still had 7,000 warships positioned in galactic space. Admiral Harper answered the question. The Unity fleet would return to Earth space once this session concluded. They would maintain defensive positions around human-claimed systems, but they would not threaten any species that did not threaten humanity first. He asked the Council to think of the fleet not as a sword hanging over their heads, but as a shield that humans were willing to share with others. When the vote finally came, it was far from unanimous. But it passed. 178 species voted in favor of beginning discussions about the treaty. 93 voted against it. 29 chose to abstain from voting either way. As the session ended and delegates began leaving, Claire Rodriguez found Elder Sareth approaching her. The ancient being spoke quietly to Claire. She said humanity had started something remarkable that day, but also something dangerous. There were many who would oppose any change to the existing order. Claire replied that she knew the risks, but they had to try. Elder Sareth agreed. She said perhaps that was humanity's greatest strength. They still believed change was possible in a galaxy that had forgotten how to hope. 6 months passed after that historic vote. The Unity fleet returned to Earth space as promised, though they remained on high alert status. The Council debates over humanity's proposed treaty continued slowly. Progress was measured in tiny steps. Some species embraced the concept eagerly. Others resisted fiercely. Most remained undecided, watching and waiting to see what would happen. Then an emergency signal came from the frontier zone, a region of space at the edge of known territory. Commander Jack Morrison was in his private quarters aboard Unity 7 when the alert sounded through the ship. He had been promoted to fleet commander after the events at Kepler, though he still kept his flagship command. Some things were too important to give up. Lieutenant Kate Sullivan's voice carried clear urgency through the communication system. She told him he needed to see something immediately. The Kelthani were under attack. Morrison reached the bridge in 60 seconds. The tactical display showed a nightmare situation unfolding. The Kelthani home system was being invaded by a species called the Zerath. These aliens came from beyond the Galactic Rim, an area where the Council had very limited contact. Morrison demanded to know how many enemy ships were involved. Kate checked her screens and reported there were over 3,000 Zerath vessels. The Kelthani defense fleet was outnumbered 5-1. They were asking the Council for help, but the nearest response fleet would take 14 hours to arrive. Morrison said quietly that the Unity fleet was only 2 hours away if they used quantum jump. Kate looked at him seriously. She reminded him that the Kelthani had not signed humanity's proposed treaty yet. Humans had no legal obligation to help them. Morrison agreed they had no legal obligation, but they definitely had a moral one. He opened a direct channel to Earth Command. Admiral Harper's face appeared on the screen, looking as tired as Morrison felt. The past 6 months of treaty negotiations had been exhausting for everyone involved. Harper said he had already seen the intelligence report about the attack. He asked Morrison for his assessment of the situation. Morrison spoke bluntly. If humans did not intervene, the Kelthani would fall within 12 hours. The Zerath were using overwhelming force tactics and targeting population centers directly. This was not just a military invasion. It was genocide. Harper was silent for a moment, thinking carefully. He finally spoke about the political consequences. If humans intervened without Council authorization, they could be violating the very laws they were asking other species to respect. Morrison countered that if they did not intervene, they would prove their principles meant nothing when tested by reality. The Kelthani were the oldest species in the Council. They had been voices of reason and wisdom for thousands of years. If humanity let them fall when they had the power to prevent it, what would that say about human values? Another voice joined the channel. It was Ambassador Claire Rodriguez. Her face showed the strain of months spent negotiating. She said she had been monitoring the situation closely. The Council was in emergency session right now discussing the crisis. Elder Sareth had formally requested assistance under the principle of humanitarian intervention, but the vote was deadlocked. Many species saw this as an opportunity to let a competitor weaken. Morrison said that attitude was despicable. How could they just watch an entire civilization die? Claire replied that it was politics, ugly as that might be. But she explained what truly mattered. If humanity intervened now without authorization, they might doom their treaty proposal. But if they did not intervene, they would prove the treaty was never sincere in the first place. Admiral Harper rubbed his tired eyes. He said sometimes there were no good choices available, only less bad ones. He gave Morrison authorization to deploy the Unity fleet to the Kelthani system, with orders to defend them. But he emphasized that Morrison must follow the rules of engagement precisely. If they were going to do this, they had to do it correctly. Morrison acknowledged the orders. He turned to his crew and gave clear. Ambassador Vexlar stood to address the Council. His posture was different from before. He seemed less certain, more thoughtful about what he wanted to say. He admitted he had opposed humanity's treaty from the very beginning. He believed it was naive and idealistic. He thought it would be impossible to actually implement in the real galaxy. But today he had watched something that changed his mind. He saw a species honor their principles when it would have cost them nothing to ignore the situation. The Unity fleet had no legal obligation to intervene in the Kelthani crisis. They gained nothing from this action. In fact, they risked political complications that could destroy their treaty proposal completely. He looked directly at Claire Rodriguez, who was watching from where observers sat in the gallery. He said the coordination was withdrawing all opposition to the human treaty. His species wished to join the Kelthani in signing it as soon as possible. Over the following hours, more and more species made similar announcements. Not all of them agreed to sign, but many did. By the end of that day, 47 different species had committed to signing humanity's mutual defense treaty. Claire Rodriguez stood alone in her quarters that night, looking out through a window at the stars beyond. Dr. Nathan Price came to join her. He was carrying 2 glasses of water for them. Nathan said they had actually done it. The treaty was really going to happen. Claire corrected him gently. They had taken the first step, she said. But there was still such a long way to go. 47 species had signed the treaty. That left 253 who had not. Nathan quoted an old saying about Rome not being built in a single day. Earth took centuries to achieve global cooperation among all its nations. They could not expect the entire galaxy to transform overnight. Claire agreed with him. But she said they had shown the galaxy that change was possible. That was worth something important. 5 years passed after the Battle of the Kelthani system, as historians would later call it. Commander Jack Morrison now sat in a very different kind of meeting. The conference room aboard Unity 7 had been modified to accommodate representatives from a dozen different species. Each one was a member of what everyone now called the Alliance for Mutual Defense in Progress. Morrison had been promoted again to the rank of admiral. But he still insisted on keeping his flagship command. Some things were too important to give up, no matter how high you rose in rank. Elder Sareth made an announcement that brought everyone to attention. She said the Zerath had returned to galactic space. Intelligence reports suggested they had been building their forces beyond the rim for years. Scout ships estimated their fleet now numbered over 15,000 vessels. A coordination representative named Ambassador Tyrnal clicked his mandibles thoughtfully. He had replaced Vexlar after the older diplomat retired. He pointed out that 5 years ago they had barely driven the Zerath back, even with the Unity fleet's help. Now the enemy returned with 5 times as many ships. A woman named Commander Lisa Chang spoke up. She was part of the new generation of officers trained in Alliance military doctrine. She commanded a joint Kelthani Earth task force. She said the Alliance was not the same as it had been 5 years ago either. The Alliance now included 93 different species. Their combined fleet exceeded 40,000 ships. Thanks to the technology-sharing provisions of the treaty, every vessel benefited from collective advancement in science and engineering. Morrison nodded in agreement. But he said there was something else they needed to consider carefully. The Zerath were not members of the Galactic Council. They did not recognize council laws or treaties. If the Alliance was going to face them in battle, they needed to understand why the Zerath had attacked the Kelthani in the first place. Elder Sareth's expression became sad and sorrowful. She said she could answer that question. 30,000 years ago, the Kelthani collective had been expanding rapidly across space. They encountered the Zerath, and in their arrogance they claimed star systems the Zerath considered sacred and holy. The conflict that followed nearly destroyed both civilizations. They eventually negotiated a peace agreement. The Kelthani agreed to respect Zerath territory beyond the galactic rim. She continued with difficulty. Until the Kelthani forgot their promises. 500 years ago, Kelthani colonists settled in a system they believed was unclaimed by anyone. They did not realize it had once been Zerath territory. When the Zerath objected to this colonization, the Kelthani dismissed their claims. They cited council law that did not recognize Zerath sovereignty. The Kelthani thought themselves beyond reproach or criticism. The room became silent as everyone absorbed this hidden history. It had never been part of any official records. Tyrnell concluded that the Zerath attacked every few centuries seeking revenge for this ancient wrong. Morrison said quietly that maybe they were not seeking revenge, maybe they were seeking justice. He asked Elder Sareth a direct question. Was that disputed colony still occupied by Kelthani? She answered yes. 3 billion Kelthani now called that world their home. They could not simply abandon those people. Morrison said he was not suggesting they abandon anyone. But what if they offered a different solution? What if the Alliance invited the Zerath to join them as members? The suggestion was met with immediate objections from half the people in the room. The Zerath were aggressors and killers. They used biological weapons against civilians. How could anyone trust them? Morrison waited for the protests to die down. He reminded them that 5 years ago, many species said exactly the same things about humanity. They called the human treaty naive and dangerous. But humans persisted in their vision. Now look at what they had built together. The Alliance had prevented 4 major conflicts through peaceful arbitration. They had shared technology that improved life across 93 different civilizations. They had created a zone of real peace in a galaxy that had known little but endless war. He moved to stand by the view screen that showed the approaching Zerath fleet in the distance. He asked what if the Zerath were not monsters? What if they were just a species that had been wronged and spent thousands of years seeking acknowledgement of that wrong? What if all they really wanted was for someone to admit they had a legitimate reason to be angry? Elder Sareth stood up slowly. Her movements were slow with great age, but her voice remained strong and clear. She agreed that Admiral Morrison was correct. The Kelthani Collective bore responsibility for this conflict. If there was any path to peace available, they must take it, regardless of what it cost their pride. Tyrnell asked what they should do if the Zerath refused their offer of peace. Morrison said flatly that then they would defend themselves with all available force. But they had to try peace first. That was what the Alliance stood for at its core. 3 days later, a single human ship approached the massive Zerath fleet. It was not Unity 7 this time. Instead, it was a vessel called Olive Branch, designed specifically for diplomatic missions and negotiations. Ambassador Claire Rodriguez stood on its bridge. Elder Sareth stood beside her, along with a team of expert translators who had spent years studying what little was known about Zerath methods of communication. The communications officer reported that the Zerath were calling them. The signal was audio only with no video. The strange chemical scent language of the Zerath filled the bridge. Apollo worked hard to translate the meaning into words everyone could understand. The Zerath message identified humans as the species who had fought them before. They said humans were defending those who had stolen from them. They asked why humans would return now. Claire took a deep breath before responding carefully. She said humans returned because they had learned something important since their last meeting. They learned that every conflict has 2 sides to the story. Humans failed to hear the Zerath side before. They were here to listen now. There was a long pause before the Zerath responded. They asked if humans truly wished to hear their story. Very well, they would tell it. 30,000 years ago, Council species promised the Zerath peace if they withdrew beyond the galactic rim. The Zerath agreed, abandoning sacred spaces to end the terrible bloodshed. Then the Council species broke their promises. They claimed Zerath holy sites. They built colonies on the graves of Zerath ancestors. When the Zerath objected to this violation, they were dismissed as primitive barbarians. Elder Sareth stepped forward to speak. She said everything the Zerath said was completely true. The Kelthani Collective had wronged them terribly. The Kelthani forgot their promises. In that forgetting, they dishonored both the Zerath people and themselves. She could not undo 30,000 years of injustice, but she could offer something important. She could offer acknowledgement. The Zerath were wronged. Their anger was completely justified and reasonable. The silence that followed seemed to last forever. Nearly a full minute passed with no response. Finally, the Zerath voice spoke again. In 30,000 years of conflict, the voice said, the Kelthani were the first to admit this truth. Claire saw her opportunity. She said humans wanted to offer more than just words. The Alliance for Mutual Defense and Progress operated on clear principles. Justice for all members, shared prosperity, collective security. She formally invited the Zerath to join the Alliance as equal partners. The disputed colony world would be Gov. The integration of the Zerath into the Alliance took many months of careful and patient negotiation. The joint governance of the disputed colony world proved challenging at first. There were disagreements and setbacks, but eventually it became successful. More importantly, The Zerath brought valuable knowledge of biology and organic technology that perfectly complemented what the Alliance already knew. 10 years passed since that first confrontation at the Kepler system. Admiral Jack Morrison stood before the Galactic Council once more. But this time the council chamber looked very different from before. The Alliance now included 178 different species. That was more than half of all galactic civilization. The species that remained outside the Alliance were not enemies. They had simply chosen to maintain their independence. Some governments, like the Vardesh Empire, had actually reformed many of their practices to compete with the Alliance's obvious success. Other species remained isolated by choice, watching and waiting to see what would happen next. Morrison had been asked to address the full council on the anniversary of the Battle of Kepler. His hair had begun turning gray over the years. His face showed lines earned from years of heavy responsibility. But his eyes still held the same determination they had always carried since that first day. He began speaking to the assembled delegates. 10 years ago, he said, the galaxy asked why humanity sent only one ship to Kepler. He had given them an answer back then, but he did not think they truly understood what it meant. Today he wanted to explain what humans really intended with that choice. He gestured toward the view screen. It showed images of Alliance achievements over the decade. Colonies thriving through shared advanced technology. Disputes resolved peacefully through fair arbitration. Scientific breakthroughs achieved through complete collaboration between species. Morrison explained that humans sent one ship because they believed something important. They believed that strength should serve justice, not replace it entirely. Humans could have arrived at Kepler with their entire fleet from the start. They could have threatened and bullied their way to victory through pure force, but that would have made them just another empire. Just another species taking what they wanted through violence and intimidation. Instead, they sent one ship to make a point that needed making. Even a single vessel, if it stood for the right principles, could change everything. They sent one ship to show the galaxy that humans were willing to risk themselves for those principles. And in return, they found something far more valuable than territory or resources could ever be. He looked out at all the assembled delegates, recognizing faces from dozens of different species that had become familiar over the years. Humans found partners, he continued. They found friends and allies who shared their vision of what the galaxy could become. The Alliance was never about human dominance over others. It was about proving that cooperation worked better than competition. That shared prosperity beat zero-sum games where one side had to lose for the other to win. That justice was more powerful than might. Korthak stood up to speak. He was the Vardesh commander who had once threatened to destroy Unity 7. He had been granted observer status at the council after his empire began major reforms. His voice had changed completely from 10 years before. Korthak agreed that Admiral Morrison spoke the truth. 10 years ago, he said, he would have destroyed that lone human ship and considered himself victorious. He would have thought himself strong and powerful. Today, the Vardesh Empire prospered through peaceful trade with Alliance members. His people lived better lives than they ever did through military conquest of neighbors. Sometimes the greatest strength was knowing when not to fight at all. Ambassador Tiernell of the Coordination added his own voice to the discussion. His predecessor Vexlar had opposed humanity's treaty because he simply could not imagine a galaxy that operated on principles rather than raw power. But the Alliance had proven that such a galaxy was not only possible, but actually preferable for everyone. The Coordination's technology had advanced more in 10 years of open cooperation than in the previous 100 years of jealously guarded isolation. A Zerath representative spoke through a translation system. The system had been greatly refined and improved through alliance collaboration between linguists and engineers. The Zerath said their species came as bitter enemies, carrying 30,000 years of justified grievance and anger. The Alliance could have easily destroyed them with overwhelming force. Instead, Alliance members listened to Zerath pain. They acknowledged the wrongs done to them. They offered real justice instead of empty words. Today, Zerath colony worlds thrived right alongside Kelthani settlements. Their children learned each other's languages in school. This was the future the Alliance offered to everyone. Elder Sarith stood with visible difficulty. She was now well past her species' normal lifespan, but advanced medical technology shared freely within the Alliance kept her alive and relatively healthy. The entire chamber fell into respectful silence when she rose. She said she had lived long enough to see something she thought impossible become reality. 40,000 years of galactic history had taught everyone that conflict was inevitable between species, that different civilizations must compete for survival, that the strong would always dominate the weak. This seemed like an unchangeable law of nature. Then humanity arrived and asked one simple question: why must it be this way? She looked directly at Admiral Morrison with her ancient eyes. That single question changed everything, she explained. When the galaxy could not answer it satisfactorily, everyone had to confront an uncomfortable possibility. Maybe their entire civilization had been built on a false assumption. The Alliance proved what humanity suspected from the beginning. Cooperation was actually more powerful than competition. Diversity made civilization stronger, not weaker. The galaxy had room enough for everyone if species were willing to share instead of fight over everything. Morrison felt the weight of this historic moment. This was not just about humanity anymore. It had grown into something much larger, something that would outlast any single species or generation. He concluded his speech by returning to the original question. The galaxy asked why humans sent only one ship to Kepler. The answer was actually quite simple when you thought about it. Humans sent one ship because they believed that one ship, fighting for the right reasons, could inspire others to join them voluntarily. They sent one ship because they wanted partners to work with, not subjects to rule over. They sent one ship because they had faith in everyone else, faith in the possibility that even ancient civilizations could choose a better path forward if someone showed them it was possible. He smiled at the memory. And when that one ship struck back, he continued, it did not strike with weapons of war. It struck with an idea. The idea that the galaxy could be better than it was, that all species could be better than they had been. That idea proved more powerful than any fleet, more lasting than any empire, more transformative than any technology. He addressed the species who still stood outside the Alliance directly. The door remained open for them, he said. Humans did not ask anyone to surrender their independence or abandon their cherished traditions. They asked only that those species consider a few questions. Were the old ways of doing things truly the best ways? Did competition really serve them better than cooperation would? Should the galaxy their children inherited be one of endless conflict, or one of shared prosperity? The council chamber erupted into discussion after his speech. But it was different from 10 years before. Back then there had been skepticism and fear in every voice. Now there was genuine hope mixed in with the debate. Later that evening, Morrison found himself standing alone in the observation deck of Unity 7. He was looking out at the endless stars beyond. Commander Lisa Cheng came to join him. She was carrying 2 cups of coffee. This human tradition had somehow spread throughout the Alliance over the years. Now dozens of species enjoyed the beverage. Lisa said quietly that they had done it. They had actually changed the galaxy in fundamental ways. Morrison gently corrected her. They had started something important, he said. But the real work continued every single day. Every generation would have to choose whether to maintain the Alliance or return to the old ways of constant warfare. Peace was not a destination you reached and then stopped. It was a choice everyone made over and over again. Lisa asked if he thought the Alliance would last into the future. Morrison thought carefully about the question before answering. He said he thought the Alliance had a real chance of lasting. They had built it on the right foundation, not on fear of punishment, not on force and threats, but on shared values and mutual benefit. As long as species continued seeing the Alliance make their lives genuinely better, as long as cooperation kept proving more rewarding than conflict, then yes, he believed it would last. He took a sip of his coffee and enjoyed its warmth. Besides, he added, the Alliance had something the old galactic order never possessed. It had hope, real hope. The belief that tomorrow could be better than today, that problems could actually be solved instead of just managed, that even ancient enemies could eventually become friended jointly by bot.